What is right government? There's no good answer to that, because what is right government changes based on our circumstances, based on how wealthy we are, what our population density is, what the technology is, all these sorts of things. And furthermore, every time something new happens, what is adequate government changes also.
We talk about government on this channel a lot, but this time it is different. COVID has made us see government in a new light, and it also made it clear that change is underway.
So will there be another stimulus, or was that all there is?
In the US, 60% of households receive more benefits than they pay in their taxes. The richest state in the world managed to provide benefit checks to its people, but politics got in the way of further help, and millions of people are slipping below the poverty line. Let's hear from our expert, Professor Anthony Davis.
That the welfare state is, particularly in a democratic environment, is unstable. More and more people end up being recipients of what we call the welfare state, and I don't mean welfare just in terms of helping poor people, but any sort of instance in which the government is handing out money or benefits to people. The federal government here is largely a system for transferring money from one group of people to the other, and on the side it has a military.
But we have been advocating that it's not supposed to be efficient in what it does anyway. And 2020 was a year that we saw that, unfortunately.
Federal spending has jumped tremendously because of COVID. I think we added something like $4 trillion to our debt just in this one year.
The Congressional Budgeting Office estimates that the COVID-19 measures will cost a total of $15 trillion to the US government in the next 5 years. $15 trillion. Can you imagine that? I bet you can't. Let's compare.
I don't think people understand how huge that is. So for example, for $15 trillion, you could buy Spain. And I don't mean buy the things that Spain produces, I mean buy Spain. Everything that's there, the land, the buildings, the houses, the cars, the trains, all of it. That's the magnitude of the number we're talking about.
It's an insane amount of money, so governments must have done its homework on where and how to spend it, right? Well, they did not. As usual, governments around the world are using the same measures for different situations within their countries.
So many Americans are saying, well, we should have had a federal response to COVID. I don't think that's right, because any federal response is necessarily a response that applies to everybody from, Los Angeles and New York City all the way down to small towns in Oklahoma and Arkansas. What's going on with COVID is hitting large metropolitan areas very differently than it hits rural areas. And so any sort of federal response is going to give you a solution that's either great for metropolitan areas and horrible for rural areas, or vice versa. And the only way to get the right response in each individual area is to have local government deal with it.
We're no strangers to this concept. Hayek explained this years ago, that local knowledge is something central planners do not have access to, and they need to trust the local authorities and the local population to decide.
Now, there are some things that local government can't do, right? Because there are some sorts of things. If we decide we're going to shut down a whole bunch of businesses, a local county might not be able to afford that. Okay. Well, that's a place for the state to step in and say, we're going to support you, not in a regulatory manner of telling you what to do, but rather in a resources manner of providing money to help you do the things that you think are best for your area. The best way to do this is to do what we have already shown works very well in markets. In a market, it's unclear what people want. In fact, people's tastes, their preferences change over time, just like circumstances change. And so rather than having a bunch of people sit down somewhere and try and figure out what people want and say, okay, we figured it out. Everybody needs 2 cars, 1 television set, a Netflix subscription, and a 1,600 square foot house. And so everybody's going to get this. That's not the way we do it. The way we do it is we let entrepreneurs come up with new ideas. And so it's this constant process of trial and error, entrepreneurs throwing out ideas, consumers judging those ideas. That trial and error process tends not to occur with government. We have the people who decide what we're going to have, and they say this is what you will have.
Only allowing people to change their minds every 4 years is too demanding and too fragile.
When you elect a person, it's not like buying a product. It's not like deciding, I want a Tesla versus a Ford. It's as if in the marketplace, rather than going to the store and buying this brand of cereal or that brand of pizza or whatever it is, you have to select, I want store A versus store B. And when you select store A, you get everything in store A, whether you like it or not. That's what the voting mechanism is like.
Small governments mimic this faster market behavior so much better and more efficiently.
Committees make things happen. Committees are the lifeblood of our democratic system.
This also allows a subsidiary principle.
If we can govern at a lower level, rather than govern at the federal level, govern at the state or the local level as much as possible, you create this same dynamic in the political sphere that we have in the economic sphere. And that is, we have a city here, Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh has policies in place to help the poor, to clean up neighborhoods, this kind of thing, that seem to work really well. Meanwhile, Erie, Pennsylvania doesn't. And so what happens? People have an incentive to move from Erie to Pittsburgh, thereby denying Erie their tax dollars and giving their tax dollars instead to Pittsburgh. And what you're doing is the same exact thing you do in the marketplace when you choose iPhone versus Android. You're giving your resources to iPhone, denying them to Android. That forces Android to figure out what it's doing wrong and do something better. Meanwhile, it promotes iPhone and allows iPhone to do more of what it does. That kind of dynamic is what we need. It's the exact opposite of what we typically do. When we see a problem, what do? We turn to Washington and we say, fix this. That's the exact opposite we should be doing. We should be turning to our local government and saying, fix this. So all of this that we're describing is subsidiarity, governing at the lowest possible level.
This pandemic showed us that we are not getting what we paid for. Many people are getting even worse treatments in other countries around the world. COVID-19 made us realize that we should make it better for everyone. For students, essential workers, artists, restaurants, cinemas, families, and the elderly. The way to do that requires us to take responsibility in shaping our governments and defending our freedoms no matter what. This is the end of our series on silver linings on COVID. Thank you very much for joining us at Learn Liberty.